Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're just having some technical difficulties with Justin coming in, but he's joining us in a few seconds. Oh, he's here. Justin, can you hear me?
I've
Oh,
got you now.
perfect, man.
Hey, sorry about that.
Nah, that's fine. I think we're starting in the left foot because your landscape behind you, it's so much nicer than mine.
Oh, stop. I wish I could take credit for it, but it's not me. It's somebody much more talented than me.
Yeah, that was the perfect spot for your office.
Hey, believe it or not, like at some point during the call, there may be some cattle like walking back here, which is, I'm not that country. I'm a city boy, so it's a little bit weird when I see cows walking around.
So you're enjoying the nice weather today.
Listen, in Minnesota, where I'm at, you have a small window for the fall. So the fall is usually for like 4 weeks, and all the leaves start to turn blaze orange and red and golden, and then boom, the snow comes. So we have long winters. Like here, we say we have a small summer and a long winter.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding, no kidding. So what's the temperature like today?
Well, today is beautiful. I'm looking out here to my east, and the sun is setting at like 70 degrees. So where
Wow.
I live, American football, this is the time, right? This is when it starts to get a little bit cool. Ideally, you want it in the 40s and 50s Fahrenheit, and that's the time for tackle football. So my son, who right before why I'm sort of maybe late for this wonderful webinar is because I was getting my son his pads on. He's got his shoulder pads and his helmet and all that, so he's ready to rock. He's got a big practice tonight.
Just following daddy's steps.
Yeah, absolutely. That's your hope.
Yeah. Is he like in a Pee Wee league or something like that?
um, this is in fourth grade, which is approximately 9 years old, is when you can first play tackle football, and so it's a big deal. That's when they put the full equipment on and they go at each other. So it's pretty hilarious to watch.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, we should start. Again, Justin, thank you for joining us today. We have, besides the whole crew in LFS, we have approximately 60 of our customers already joining us today. And like I always say, it's a pleasure to have a friend of the house, a personal friend, a business partner, and a guy that I really admire joining us today. So I really appreciate the time for you joining this webinar today.
I'm so glad to be here too. For everybody taking time away from their family to be with us, I give you kudos. It's a sign of your dedication to your practice. So thank you for tuning in.
Okay. So we'll start very simple, and I'm gonna try to stop you in a few of your chapters. But why don't you tell us where are you exactly right now? Who do you? I mean, your family, a little bit of your history, background, and all that.
Okay, yeah, and I'll try to be brief. I grew up in essence, because I know we got a global audience, don't we,
Right.
Andres?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm in the upper Midwest of the United States, and where I live is Minnesota. And there's two cities in Minnesota that are like kind of right in the central part of the state. One's called Minneapolis and one called St. Paul. And so I'm on the St. Paul side. I grew up here. I'm very happy to call it home, but the last 20 years of my life, I've been on the road. So while I'm very happy to call Minnesota my home base, where I have a wife and two beautiful kids, I got a 9-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter who are active and crazy. And with COVID and no school, they're driving us nuts, like probably many of you on the call. Um, um, this is home base technically for me, usually on the weekends. So on the weekdays, I tend to be on the road. So the firm I work for, called 8VC or 8 Venture Capital, is based out of San Francisco. And so most of the time, at least pre-COVID, I used to travel every week. On Monday, I would leave and go to San Francisco. How I found my way into venture capital, if I were to kind of like start where I'm at today and work backwards, I started an early stage investment company called Cardiff Ventures. And the funny story is my grandmom, who helped raise me, was a war bride out of Cardiff, Wales. And Wales is that little itty bitty country that borders, within Great Britain, they border England. And so Wales and Scotland and Ireland are sort of like the little brothers of England. And anyways, it makes us tough. But my grandmom was a war bride. After World War II, she came and immigrated into the U.S. and she was very enterprising, and she ran a number of companies. And so that's why I named my early stage investment company Cardiff Ventures after my grandmom. And while I was doing that, 8VC, who's a much more professional early stage investment firm, which we'll talk a lot about today, was a sort of a Silicon Valley titan that found out about me and said, hey, fly out here. We want to meet you. We want to sort of investigate you as a potential executive in residence. And fast forward, I ended up joining them, and I'm part of the firm now. If I were to, Andres, back up from there, I was with YRC Worldwide, which is probably the second largest less than truckload carrier in all of North America. It's the old legacy Yellow and Roadway came together, and they bought a number of regional carriers, Redaway, Holland, Newpan, many others that ended up being divested. But at one point, the firm that I was with, YRC, for 3 years, was a $12 billion organization. And after the 2008, 9, and 10 recession, they shrunk to a $5 billion company. Unfortunately, to this day, they're still alive and kicking through many of diving catches and miracles, if you will. But I was very fortunate to be their chief commercial officer for 3 years. And so I'm sure at some point in this conversation, we'll talk about what I did in my tenure with YRC and why that was important in shaping who I am today and my philosophies around the industry and around progressing and modernizing the industry. And then prior to that, I had primarily a North American managed transportation 3PL that I owned called Logistics Planning Services. And then I had a Antwerp, Belgium heavy haul freight forwardership called LP Projects International. And I exited those companies to Global Trans in early 2017. And so I grew up in the business. And my last comment would be, as it relates to my background, many people don't necessarily like grow up thinking they want to get in logistics. You kind of like fall into it, and then it's hard to get out once you're in it. For me, that happened because my dad, when he was in the war in Vietnam, he managed logistics. So he was getting ammunitions and supplies out into the field, and just managing all the supply chain of all the materials you need to be in combat. And he took that into an aviation company and then into 3M. And at some point, I'd say in the late 80s, my dad ran all inbound transportation for 3M, which is at the time was a top 10 company in all of the US. And so my dad taught me everything I know about transportation and logistics. And, so I was sort of like birthed into the industry. So, thanks for bearing with that long-winded, exercise into who I am and how I got into this space.
Yeah, no problem. And actually, I wanna stop myself in that chapter for LPS. Mm-hmm. So LPS, it's what everyone will dream about. Just grow a small business and take it as big as you can, then to sell that company and to be international, to handle domestic transportation, international transportation. Can you walk us through that LPS piece, which I believe as LFS CEO, pretty much it's a similar story what we're right now with LFS, and hopefully one day we'll get to the point where LPS was.
Well, thank you for that compliment. Listen, for all of you taking again time to chime in, I want you to remember that in our ambitions to grow and make money, we have to keep two things paramount in our minds as to why do we want to make money. And the number one most important thing, which we've seen is very workable for Amazon, is customer obsession. And so customer experience and delivering a world-class service offering for customers has to be in your fabric, your ethos. And to the extent it isn't, and by the way, if you're not authentic about really caring about the customer, they will leave you. Like, boom, you'll have churn issues like you can never believe. And so LPS found great success because I had something called the power of five. Now let me pause right there and remember the power of five. The secondary thing that's most important in running a business is your people. And so the hiring and training and development and retention of the employees I had was paramount in our business. We looked at every employee we had, and at our peak, it was 200 employees, as family. And so it was funny, the retention of my customers and the retention of my employees was what I call the power of five. So I always kept 95% of my customers and 95% of my employees. And by the way, after 15 years, that never changed. And so in my opinion, after 15 years, that's not like happen chance. To me, that's a trend, and that's a positive trend. So what I figured out real quickly is if I can deliver a world-class experience for the customer and make sure the people that are delivering that experience never leave me, which means I got to pay them right, I got to treat them right, I got to make sure that they're being developed mentally and intellectually. They can't just be doing mundane work. If I was able to do those things, I wouldn't lose my people, and therefore I wouldn't lose my customers, which allowed for compound growth. And so we had an up and right trajectory that allowed us to hit, I was in the Inc. 500, 5,000, 5 consecutive years. We doubled 5 years in a row. So think about this, from 2010 to 11, we doubled. 11 to 12, we doubled. 12 to 13, we doubled again. We did this up until 2015. But all the while we did that, the Twin Cities' biggest periodical, the Star Tribune, declared us among the top 10 greatest employers in the Twin Cities. You know, it was like, it was a family, right? Like we were in this thing together. And so there's a lot you can learn from that. In 2020, this society has gotten so digital, and we are so focused on like automation and robotics and AI. And trust me, like I work for a company that invests in technology companies. But all that said, logistics is still a people sport, Andreas, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree.
It's a people sport. Like you're only as good as the quality and the authenticity of your people. And to the extent you can sustain a world-class operation of human capital and intelligence, that's going to declare what your book looks like. I'm sorry, technology's not. Yes, you need a good tech stack, but this is still a people sport because transportation is very complex. So
now, I want to rephrase something that you just said about technology and people. How do you exactly, and logistics, how do you know where to invest in people and where to invest in technology? How do you make that difference?
No, super hard. It's very difficult, and you'll make mistakes, but I will tell you, the planning, when you look a year ahead, and for me, I'm a big believer in 3 years has to back into 1 year, which has to back into 90-year goals. You feel me? I've never believed in 5-year planning or 10-year planning. You don't know what the hell is going to happen in the economy or in your business. So I think the furthest out you should ever look is 3 years, and then back yourself up to a 1-year plan, and then from there 90-day goals. So when I think about human capital and technology, and I think about my financial goals and my operational and procedural goals, they should all, in essence, be, what do I need to spend money on today that's going to help me hit my 1-year plan so that I'm on pace for my 3-year plan? And anything beyond that, you're wasting your time, because in technology, most technology after 5 years is obsolescence. It's like, you know, I mean, things change so much, code bases and features and databases and just the way, and even the cost structures of software, if you're buying software off the shelf, they change so much every 5 years that I think you've got to kind of like compress your time periods of how you're planning for CapEx and say, okay, next year I'm going to spend an additional $1 million. And then you got to decide, of that $1 million, how am I going to bifurcate what is really need to be spent on sales and operations or back office, and what do I really need to spend on technology? And once you've determined sort of, you know, those percentages, and typically I would say technology as a percentage of your revenue should be like 4 or 5%. And that's a big number, right? If you're a big company, 4 or 5% is sort of like an ambitious number. If you're smaller, it might be like 2 or 3%. So if you're $100 million company, you better be budgeting about $2 million for technology. If you're a $50 million company, Andreas, you better have $100 million, or I'm sorry, $1 million allocated for technology upgrades. Whether you're building it with your own staff or whether you're buying product off the shelf for pricing or for CRM or for, shipment execution. So I could go on for that for days, but hopefully that gives you a little context of the way I think about people in tech planning.
Yeah, it does. It does. Now, moving up to your YRC chapter. So you, after your successful run with LPS, you join YRC, you come into this legacy company, like 100-old company with a bunch of 70-year-old guys joining the board. And then you have this slick guy with tattoos all over and your pink suit. I remember that as it was yesterday. But more importantly, how do you manage, and this question goes to what it's going on right now, which everyone was just used to their normal life. They're going every day to the office, setting up a budget at the beginning of the year and try to execute it throughout the year. It's the same thing when you're you get into YRC. You got in there, and there were this way of doing things forever, and then you come as chief commercial officer. How do you manage to change, and what did you change inside YRC?
Man, if you got a bottle of wine in 3 hours, I'll tell you.
I have enough time.
I know we don't have that much time. So YRC, I will tell you this. When you're around for 100 years, and it was a conglomerate of companies, and they had divested many of those. And so when I joined, it was 4 operating companies, and I happened to be a part of. So think of the 4 companies are here, and I was in a holding company up top, and so I was a part of like the hated executive team. We chopped wood, like we worked our asses off, pardon my French, because this was a company that had a lot of guns pointed at its head. We were a union-based organization, and while I love my Teamster labor, there was restrictions. There were just a lot of things that we had to work against from an inertia perspective to get the productivity we needed, and we just could never get the productivity numbers we needed. From a safety perspective, our numbers just weren't where we needed them to be. And a lot of that had to do just with sentiment. Like there was like an us versus them sentiment, right? If you're a big fan of proper football, soccer, if you will, and you hate your neighboring town, and you think about that, you know what I mean? That head-to-head, alpha to alpha, football club versus football club. Imagine that in your business in multiple capacities. So when I entered in, I was Geneva, Switzerland. I came as this independent young punk that had no prior biases, and I walk in, and all of a sudden I find out there's 2 major battles going on. There's a battle between corporate and labor meaning drivers and dock labor, union workers, and corporate being executives, finance, sales, so on and so forth. But then you also had 4 independent companies, okay? So you had YRC Freight, Holland, Redaway, New Penn, 4 different presidents, 4 different CFOs, 4 different VPs of sales, 4 different operating systems, 4 different CRMs. You feel me? Like you can't even begin to like explain how separated and siloed these entities were. So they just only so happened to share a ticker symbol on the NASDAQ. They were a publicly held company that had a synergy and a ticker symbol and nothing else. And so Andreas, when you asked me, what was your role in 2016 coming into this company? I think first and foremost, it was just to be the neutralizer, like, hey, I'm this new young punk that just wants to get you all to play nice together. Let's open up the sandboxes and start to look for common synergies in our locations of our assets, meaning our terminals, building density in our line haul, starting to bring our sales teams together. So rather than selling against each other, let's sell together. We built a brokerage, which we'll get into later, called Henry Logistics. Let's use a non-asset company to help us augment our assets so that we can get more wallet share with our customers. Even things like, let's take our IT organizations and bring them together. Let's take marketing, which is fragmented, and bring it together. So this whole enterprise shared service concept, I'm sure they had thought about in the past, but were never able to really execute on because you had this bad blood. The best example I could give you would be if like Liverpool and Chelsea had to come together. Think how awkward that would be, right? Like if Barcelona and Manchester United came together, could you imagine how awkward that would be, right?
Right.
Like, and so when you brought Roadway and Yellow together, you brought enemy and state together. The Hatfields and McCoys came together and they were allegedly supposed to play nice, and they didn't. And so I came in and tried to like just be a neutralizer. And then the last thing I'll say is this, and I get this is long-winded, but in big businesses, if you're a $5 billion organization with 30,000 families that are relying on you to make good decisions, you don't just get to be a Netflix style innovator where you just pivot your whole business and do something different. So I adopted something called dual transformation, which means have a defensive strategy, meaning build resilience for today in your core operating, sort of model, and then build a new growth engine for tomorrow and do them in parallel. And I call them business A and business B, and thou shall not sort of like, intersect. And business A is the sugar daddy, and the sugar daddy funds business B. This is sort of like your hip, innovative, young venture arm over here, and this is your old, stodgy legacy business. But guess what? They're better together than apart. And so you have some people on the phone today. Matter of fact, many of them actually work for you today. I have a number of ex-employees that are now, I'm proud to say, members of the LFS family. They were people I handpicked from the logistics community. I recruited them into the business to say, hey, I need you to be a part of business model B. You're the growth engine. I need you to go nuts. Over here, I'm going to try to just build a good defense so we don't lose accounts and we don't blow up the business. But over here, you're my jet engine. Just go. No restrictions, not bureaucracy, none of that bullshit. Go. And so it's hard to explain 3 years in 5 minutes, but by and large, you can see where I'm going with it. It was about bringing enterprise together and having an A/B business model.
Yeah. I think we completely got the idea. Actually, I start receiving some questions. I just want to remind everyone that if you guys have questions, you can chat it or you can raise your hand and you can ask it directly, whatever you want. Somebody's saying, now that you made that example of the soccer teams, how often you get to say that you look exactly like David Beckham? Man, that's like every time we get into these stories, we get the same question.
If I had his balance sheet and maybe his bride, I'd be pretty okay with it. No, I love my bride. No, but I would take his balance sheet.
Listen, so the YRC chapter is over then. After being so many years with boots on the ground, being the one making like transactional decisions, like day-to-day strategies, brainstorms and all that, you come to the other side, the investor side. Mm-hmm. How did that have changed your way of seeing businesses being in AVC? And perhaps you can explain a little bit deeper what a venture capital does. A lot of people here have heard the name, have heard some of the big names, but they exactly don't know what venture capital is about.
Sure. So 8, like the number 8, some people think I'm saying ABC.
Yeah.
VC was recently awarded, or at least designated, as the most active venture capitalist in all of logistics technology worldwide. And that's a pretty fascinating thing to think about. That basically means we have billions of dollars deployed just into companies introducing tech and services to supply chain. They're out of Silicon Valley. They're out of San Francisco. We're in Austin, Texas, and we're in New York City. The beauty of ABC is that unlike a lot of venture capital groups and a lot of private equity groups and a lot of investment banks, I joined a group that are not career investors. They're entrepreneurs. So these are men and women who have built companies, world-class companies, um, sold them, um, built more companies, sold them, and then became independently wealthy enough to create their own fund, which is pretty incredible. And so over the course of the last 6 years, they've had 4 funds. The average fund size is $700 million. So today we actively have $3.5 billion deployed into companies: bio-IT, healthcare, financial tech, insure tech, government tech, generalist smart enterprise. And then right over here on this side is freight tech or supply chain tech. And this has quickly emerged to be our second largest segment of the portfolio, absent of healthcare. And by the way, for perspective, in the United States, healthcare is 17% of our GDP. So you're talking about trillions of dollars. So absent of attacking healthcare challenges, supply chain was viewed, but by the way, some of the smartest minds in the world, MIT, Yale, Stanford, as an incredible opportunity. And the funny thing is that for decades, freight, supply chain, logistics was like considered to be some blue collar back office bullshit, right? Isn't that hilarious?
Yeah.
And now today, you win and lose battles based on logistics. If you go back into the annals of time and you look at warfare, okay, and you look at people that have won and lost wars going into the 800s, the 1300s, the 1700s, and into today modern warfare, logistics tends to matter more so than human bodies or even weapons, if that makes sense, right? Logistics strategy matters. And what's interesting is if you take it out of a DoD concept and you bring it into the private sector and you say, well, how does supply chain create competitive advantage for businesses today? Well, I dare you to think of a single business today that isn't winning or losing based on their effectiveness in supply chain. Look at Amazon.
Right.
Fair. Look at who you buy your washer and dryer from. So I could go on and on about how important supply chain is. So we have a mindset that we want to find you early. So I'm a part of a group that looks really early. In many cases, we're investing into founders that literally have not written a line of code. So Andreas, they've got a concept. They might have, in essence, all they have is a PowerPoint deck, and we call that seed stage. And at that point, they're saying, hey, I need just enough money to take these ideas and put them into motion. And once they're in motion, then I'll go to an A round financing and I'll raise more money and put this thing onto a trajectory. Where there's so much confusion about venture-backed companies versus maybe PE-backed companies is this. I'm not expecting that company to hit a home run in 2 years. I'm not expecting the companies we invest in to hit a home run in 5 years. But in years, probably call it 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, maybe 12, that 7 to 12 year range, the unit economics are going to work themselves out, and I'm going to hit like grand slams. And so, if I bet on 10 companies and I give 10 companies $1 million, my hope is that 3 of them like really make it, like return the fund type performance. And I hope that maybe 3 of them perform okay and give me a modest return, like a small cap return. And then I understand that probably 3 or 4 are just going to go belly up and go out of business. So that's a venture-backed mentality, like it's boom or bust. That's very different than if I'm an entrepreneur self-funding my growth, which was my old world. Like I use the bank, a line of credit, and grit to grow. And that's what, Andreas, you're doing with LFS. And I love that business because you're profitable and you're doing it organically and you're not asking for help. Like, believe me, like in my heart, like I still love like the organic model, but working for a company with a truckload of cash, it is pretty cool to see that you can give an entrepreneur with a great idea the monies he or she needs to like do something special, and boom, they're off to the races. So that's the world I live in today. I'm like Shark Tank. I just make bets.
Okay, so Justin, is having a great idea enough, or what is having a great idea means exactly, so people don't get confused and excited at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, being an entrepreneur, when Andres, when you and I came up in the early to mid 2000s, being an entrepreneur was like taboo. Like no one even knew what the hell that word meant.
Right.
And now it's like sexy. Like being an entrepreneur today is a little bit like, being the latest and greatest TikTok star, and I don't say that to discourage people, because follow your dreams, but at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with working for somebody or getting a job with an established organization. I think we've glamorized entrepreneurship, Andreas. I would hope to think you agree with me. Um, so, I guess I don't want to fall too far off topic, but I think what really we look for in like a great bet is a track record of success. So when someone comes to us with no code, no customers, they're pre-revenue, it's probably not someone off the street. Like the community that I'm investing with have so many incredible connections that they're only seeing. By the way, we see 4,000 inbound deals a year, so pitches, if you will. So 4,000 individual companies every year come pitch us, and we bet on 1% of them, so 40 of them. So of the 4,000 that pitch us, we'll bet on 40. Those 40, I'm guessing the founders have already had success. They were Andreas Lopera, they built a company, they sold it, they're starting their next company, and they've come to us for funding. And now I can say, I like the jockey on that horse, I'm betting on him. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Like that's a big deal.
Okay. Okay. Now, going directly, I mean, there's like those fresh guys coming right out of college, and they're, like you say, people that already had success and sold those companies. But what about those small legacy companies with these owners that have been sitting in those seats for 10 years or so, and they're starting to listen that sexy word, as you said, you know what, I probably might have a chance to become this big entrepreneur. How do they redirect their pathway into success, or even into more success from what they have right now? Do they have the chance to try to get some of those things that are going on, how they can get to there? Because what we can see, and at least in the logistics industry, and the industry that I am, which is the freight forwarding industry, is we kind of we try to do what everyone else is doing, and we follow the same path. What you believe will be the key things to get rid of that same path that everyone is following?
That's a good question. It's not easy to answer, but I would say if I was an aspiring business that's already established, or I'm a new business founder, there's probably two things I'm trying to do, and they're kind of separate tracks. Track one is I'm going to try to create an unfair advantage, meaning I might try to go find like an anchor customer that not only is going to become my customer, but it's going to invest in me. And think about that. That didn't ever happen in the past, but nowadays, big companies are thinking to themselves, why should I not invest in the companies that are going to eventually become my suppliers? You feel me? So if I'm C.H. Robinson, I'll just give you an anecdotal example. If I'm C.H. Robinson, or I'm Schneider or Werner or J.B. Hunt, and I'm a publicly traded company, and I spend $1 billion on tech, and my stock price is $100. Well, I can spend $1 billion on tech, and in 3 years, my stock price might still be $100. So what did I really effectively do for my shareholders? Not a lot, right? Now, from a P&L perspective, like I didn't lose $1 billion. Like I replaced that probably with new revenues. But the point was, is like I created, new features and new opportunities to improve the customer experience and to take on customers. But by and large, from an enterprise valuation standpoint, what did I do? And so when we have these conversations with big companies lately, this is me with my venture capital hat on, I try to say, hey, you need a brand new track and trace mechanism, or you need a new billing mechanism, or you need a whole new platform for onboarding and procuring transportation and carriers. Rather than doing that within your ecosystem, why don't we create a whole new co? We'll have a separate brand. is going to take on multiple customers, of which I'm going to be a master tenant customer. I'm going to be an early pioneer customer, but they're going to take on many others. And I'm going to get what I need, right? I'm going to spend the money to get what I need from a technology perspective, but I'm going to do it for profit. So think if you're that company who's a startup and you found that big company, maybe it's Maersk Lines, right? And Maersk Lines says, I really love what you're building around containerized tracking or around, whatever, customs, automated customs clearance. I'm going to invest in you, Mr. or Mrs. Entrepreneur, and I'm going to become your customer, and I want 20% of your business. I can tell you right now, if I'm the entrepreneur, I'm saying, hell yeah, I'll give you 20% of my business if you promise me a guarantee of 3 years or 5 years of your business. You see where I'm going with that? So there's not enough entrepreneurs today, or even established businesses, that are going and having those difficult sort of strategic conversations with big master tenant type customers. To pivot a little bit, I'd say your other option is simply this: look for a blue ocean. We all are kind of fighting in a very red bloody ocean, meaning we're fighting for the same business. It's a race to the bottom from a pricing perspective. And so then you just try to control your operating expenses to make sure that you can control gross profits. And that's a tough business. And eventually 10 years from now, like, we're all going to experience margin compression if you're an intermediary in any fashion, freight forwarder, traditional broker, managed trans, 3PL, 4PL, whatever the hell. And so what I would challenge new entrants to think about, let's just say you're going to create a brokerage today, I would say become a brokerage or a forwarder that's got an extreme niche focus. Be world-class in life sciences. Hell, be world-class in pet food. Be world-class in electronics. But you see where I'm going with it? Like, go to the industry events, like, understand how they think, act, talk, spend money. And so that you as a niche provider can say, there's nobody, not Kuehne+Nagel, not D.B. Schenker, not C.H. Robinson, not nobody, that understands your world better than me. And so, Andreas, when I did this back in the day, for me, it was power utilities. Nobody knew more about nuclear plants, coal-fired plants, gas-fired plants, or renewable energy than me. Why? I sat on their boards. I went to all their, their council meetings and their, conferences. Why? So that when I wanted to talk about transportation, I was talking about transportation within the context of utility supply chain. If I was only talking to them about supply chain in the context of consumer goods, there's no merit. That's dock to dock. Utilities aren't dock to dock players. So I could say the same thing about telecom and petrochem. So I think, think about blue ocean, and the blue ocean basically means that, like, the preponderance of competitors that you might have, they don't exist. There might only be one or two, and just go play in that niche and dominate the shit out of it. So.
Okay, I want to follow up with the blue ocean, which I totally concur and identify myself with the blue oceans and the bloody red oceans. As far as blue ocean goes, what do you believe supply chain management and logistics management should be looking at as blue oceans? What are some of those blue oceans, generally speaking, on the industry that we should focus on, perhaps technology-wise or industry-wise?
Great question. I'll give you three, and I'll try to be quick. One would be, because of COVID, and naturally that's been a devastating health crisis on every country in the world, most countries in the world. Physical exchange of paperwork is not preferred anymore. Is that fair?
Yeah.
There's great opportunities to digitize the way we do business by removing paperwork. And everyone would say in the world of transportation, paperwork is just like, the devil of the industry. So, I think that is a blue ocean in of itself. Like, how do we continue to force shippers, carriers, and brokers to evolve into a more digitized sort of workflow or life cycle, from order creation to pro-creation to tracking to billing? And so ABC's invested in a company called Vector and another one called Platform Science that are doing just that. I'd say another scenario would be, we have a major crisis with drivers. I think we can all agree that finding drivers to drive truck in virtually any country in the world is tough. The average age is in the mid 50s. It's a dangerous sport. They're not rewarded. They're treated like shit. They're not paid enough. It's a very tough occupation. And so what I would argue is that a company we invested in called Baton is thinking about driver experience and sentiment as two things. How do I feel when I'm running on the open road? And how do I feel when I'm in a city? And I want all of you to think about that. If you're listening to XM radio or a podcast or your favorite radio station on the open road versus fighting traffic in Philadelphia, navigating through stoplights and tight turns, only to get to a manufacturing shipper or a distribution center to wait for 3 hours, that sucks the lifeblood out of a driver. And so basically what Baton, which by the way only started less than a year ago, has figured out is we're going to create in essence, a drop zone, a marshal yard, if you will, where once you get off the highway, let's say in Southern California, I'm going to have 14 drop lots, and I'm going to give you a designated drop lot. The minute you're off the highway, you're going to drop that trailer, and I already have a preloaded trailer for you to hook and get the hell back on the highway and get out of Southern California. And I'll worry about final mile delivery or first mile pickup. And the way they'll do that is to say, okay, if 3 to 5 is a terrible time to be in traffic, don't go to a distribution center from 3 to 5. Go at 7 at night or go at 8 a.m. And so there's really cool businesses that are just trying to attack problems in the industry. So those are like what I would call like your new stage, sort of like digitized paperwork, make the driver experience better. The third area I say that you could create a blue ocean though, if you just want to be, and I don't mean this to be offensive, but like a traditional freight manager or a third party, if you will, would be to say, again, focus on a client segment your customers and say, this geography, this vertical, I plan to own. Meaning, let's just say I live in the US. I'm picking Chicago, Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Madison, Omaha. That's it. Those are my cities. And I'm only looking for people that are doing industrial distribution and HVAC. So if you're doing heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment, electrical supplies and safety product, and other parts and maintenance services, you're my world. And I'm just going to obsess about you. And I really don't care about food and beverage. I don't give a shit about oil and gas. I don't care about any of that mess. I'm just going to focus on, this distribution world, like Fastenal, Gray Bar, or, go down the list. And people that I think have the mental capacity and the will to just dominate a micro segment of a vertical will find themselves, I think, creating a predictable motion for how they attract referral-based business. Because cold calling is a beast. But if I can get referral-based business, which means I'm doing such a good job for this air conditioning company that I'm going to get the next 5 air conditioning companies, right? I'm doing such a good job for this pet food company that I'm going to get the next 5 because my case study over here is so strong and so bolstered that these other 4 have no choice but to say, man, they seem to know what they're doing. They have a niche in pet food. Okay, I'm going to go with the niche guy versus your generalist brand. So right. I'll stop there.
But I mean, following what you just said, how important has been in your life networking, your whole network? I mean, how important and how big of an asset is that for you?
That's everything. I mean, keep in mind, I started off the call, and I hope you're okay with me doing this, Andres. I started off the call talking about I live in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's been the hotbed of a lot of conflict, basically since Memorial Day. The U.S. in general, if you all are from the outside looking at the U.S., you're probably like, what the hell is going on up there? We've got racial and social divide. We've got the COVID crisis and the economic impact that's having. And so I spend a fair bit of my time when I'm not in my for-profit mindset, because I've created a non-for-profit called Change Starts With Me, talking to inner city youth about their networks. And you wouldn't believe that these young men and women don't understand the power of and the influence of their network and the connectivity of if you know this guy, I know Andreas, and Andreas knows 20 people really well, and those 20 people know another 20 people really well, that spider web of network is the difference between you getting an opportunity in life and not. So invest in those networks or suffer is sort of like my piece, right? Like, okay, you've been dealt a bad hand, you're in a bad situation, your only way out of it is your network. You feel me? I can take that from the streets of Minneapolis and take the same principle into business. You're aspiring business, you're growing, but not as fast as you'd like. You're a little bit worried about taking on some debt. You lost a big customer. You might have to lay off a couple people. COVID hits, and you're like, what do I do? You can't read a book, and that book's going to lead you out of sort of like the depths of where you're at. This is not going to work. By the way, a podcast or a motivational book is not going to get you out of the depths where you're at. I think they're important to listen to just to keep your mind right. But at the end of the day, your network's all you got. It's this tribal mentality, right? You know, it's just like how you raise your kids. It takes a tribe to raise kids. It takes a village. And so in business, to the extent that you invest time, meaning on your calendar, right? Go to Outlook or Gmail and designate slots in your calendar where you're going to spend time with people that you fundamentally believe care about you. And so if I look at a Monday to Friday week and I say, I'm going to designate 2 hours this week to invest time with mentors or associates outside of my business that I believe care about me. And I'm going to go into that meeting very prepared with some questions that might help me, better manage my business, but also some asks. And those asks are going to be, hey, I really need your help getting introduced to 3M. I know you work at 3M. You've been there 15 years. What I need you to do is not get me business. I'm simply asking for you to give me a phone call with the head of transportation because he's your colleague and you've worked here 15 years, and so you've got some clout. And I really need you to do it. I won't embarrass you. I'll let you give him the courtesy of a heads up. But you're a dear friend. We grew up together. I need you to connect me to this person because I can help them, and here's how. So I go into that call not to use them or utilize them. I'm not a utilitarian, but I think it's okay if I care about somebody and they care about me for me to ask for help. That's human nature. Do you feel me, Andres? Yeah. It's like, and today in 2020, it's such a digital culture. We're so deathly afraid to ask for help. Like, get the hell out of here. Andres, if I needed help, you don't think I would hesitate to call you, right?
No.
I'm a grown-ass man. I'm 41 years old. I feel like I've done some good things in life. But when I hit a fork in the road and I'm trying to figure something out in business or I need a referral, I wouldn't hesitate to call you and say, Andres, I need you, man. I need you to tee me up with this person at Expeditors in Seattle. I really need to talk to him. Will you do that for me? And if I ask you authentically, it's like, hey, Andres, like, will you please tell me, like, I need to meet this person, versus being cocky, but like, oh, I don't need any help. Like, I'll figure it out. That's the problem with people that are aspiring business owners is like, in one respect, you want to be confident and a pit bull, but I'm telling you, in another respect, like, swallow your pride and schedule time every week to mature your network, because your network is where you're going. And to the extent you ignore your network, it's probably to the extent you grow complacent as a business and potentially go out of business.
Okay, and would you agree that just this social distance that we're going through right now it might be a good excuse for people not wanting to extend and grow even more their network? How companies should fight over people just spending hours and hours just navigating through social network or over emails instead of just grabbing the phone and get in touch with people like if they were like right next to each other?
Yeah, I think the art of the phone is a lost art. Is that fair? Like, okay. The art of conversation has surprisingly become a lost art in our hopes to automate the way we do business and sort of like grease the skids of inbound lead generation and our cost of customer acquisition. I get all those things are important. And so to the extent digital marketing and paid SEO and all this online, sort of like marketing dollars you can spend to create lead generation, do that. By the way, it's 2020. You have to do those things. That said, it doesn't take you off the hook from needing to commit to picking up the phone and dialing. But don't just dial haphazardly. There's so much information available for us today between resources like Dun & Bradstreet and Zoom Info and LinkedIn. Know your prospect. And so if I'm going to call for 1 hour from 9 to 10, the day prior from 4 to 5, I should be doing research and taking notes on the people I plan to call the next morning from 9 to 10. Does that make sense? Yeah. So from 4 to 5 the previous day, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm figuring out where did they go to college? What are their interests? What are our shared connections? For all we know, we might have a really close friend but that takes planning. Do that planning the day prior. You come into 9 a.m. the next day, you've had your coffee, did your 50 push-ups, you get in there and you're ready to rock. But by the way, you're prepared. So people I think today are hitting their heads against the wall just haphazardly cold calling. I'm not suggesting that, but I would say if you prepare for your phoning session, I believe in most people would best perform having a 9 to 10 a.m. phoning session and a 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. phoning session, 2 hours a day. That's it. 9 to 10, 2 to 3. The rest of the time, you're doing research, you're doing emails, and you're doing account engagement. To me, that's the perfect formula.
Okay. And continue with this COVID-19, which we'll probably continue to talk about over the next couple of years or so. I got this question from one of our guests saying, hey, listen, the biggest enemy that this situation right now that we're facing, that we have, it's uncertainty. Mm-hmm. How do we fight uncertainty being a business owner? How do you plan for the future? Yeah. How do you commit to a budget? How do you make changes? How do you invest money? How do you hire people if uncertainty is all over the place?
Off the cuff, I say yes, exercise caution when you are in a moment of, significant uncertainty, of which today we are. In the US, you got an election in approximately, 6 weeks?
Right.
You've got COVID, of which we may or may not have a vaccine from J&J. We allegedly have one coming from AstraZeneca. There's a lot of unknowns in the market. By the way, in the US, there's a big sort of chasm between Main Street and Wall Street. Like Wall Street's going nuts. Meanwhile, Main Street's got 20 million people unemployed. So, and what's hilarious is that the freight market in North America is going bonkers, right? Like it's as good as it's been in a couple of years. I'm still cautious though, because I'm like, I tend to think there's going to be a market correction of significant, influence. So go into 21 with your guard up 100%. Yes. Like don't come into 21 thinking that you're going to knock the cover off the ball. Now, having said that, you have to address moments of uncertainty with facts. In many cases, facts are not based on pontificating what the future might bring, but studying the past. And so I think in the world of the freight market, you can look at cycles. It's a very cyclical industry. If you subscribe to Sonar, if you subscribe to other data resources, I would rely on those to help you understand over the last 20 years, what has been the pattern of cycles, how bad have things gotten, how good have things gotten, and what's sort of like the median, and let those facts sort of drive, how you create best case, worst case. The problem with people's budgets today, especially if you're and I don't mean disrespect by this, if you're more of like a fledgling business that has more sort of loose standards around how you do budgeting and planning, you'll tend to do your budgeting based on a best case scenario. You feel me? And so you'll go into 21 saying, well, ideally, if everything goes our way, here's what our top line is going to be. And then you start to build your budget off of that. So here's my labor planning, my CapEx for tech, right, buildings, whatever it might be. And I'd say, well, no, that's probably not an okay thing to do. You need to have a best case scenario, a worst case scenario, create a bridge between the two. Okay, what are the factors, what are the 10 factors that are going to lead me to my worst case budget, my best case? And of those 10 factors, which ones can you control? Because arguably you might only be able to control 4 of them, and 6 might be completely out of control. So the 4 you can control, that's right. Say, okay, let's give our budget a confidence factor. Okay, here's best case, worst case. I give myself a 20% chance at best case, 30% chance at worst case. We'll probably end up somewhere right in here. And then figure out what are the things you can control to hit that likelihood of your budget and apply people to it. And when I say apply people to it, put their name on it. So literally on a piece of paper, here's your timeline, here's the scope, here's the desired outcome, here's your name, sign it. It doesn't mean they don't need people to help them, but in today's day and age, too often in the spirit of teamwork, nobody owns a project, nobody owns a budget, nobody owns an outcome. And so I'm a big proponent of an individual, typically a leader, having to put their name on a goal, a controllable goal though, by the way, and endorse it. And if they're not willing to do it, you probably got the wrong leader. So.
Good, man. Hey, listen, can't believe time already flies so fast. And I really appreciate all the stories, the knowledge, the time that you have spent with us, Justin. And I'm sure this is not going to be the last time you're going to share some of those adventures with all the people that are here today. And I really appreciate the time that you took today to have this webinar.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. I'll join anytime. Maybe my closing comments, Andres, would be, we're doing work that matters. Commerce matters. In the U.S., for example, 70% of all goods travel over the road. And so the freight coordination that we do keeps the world moving. Whether it's safety stock, whether it's groceries, medical supply, construction equipment, all these things, they got to move. And I think sometimes we lose maybe, we don't understand like the depth of the importance of the work that we do. And so for those of you that took time to be in the call, and those of you that are part of this freight ecosystem, I would tell you, you're doing work that matters, and keep it up. And I appreciate the work that you do.
Okay, Justin, thank you so much. And I look forward to see you again, man.
Thank you. Cheers.
Okay. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see each other in another webinar for LFS. Thanks again. Bye-bye.